It's models and a lot of these girls who work in the,
The lawsuit didn't just accuse Howard Stern. It dragged his private world into the spotlight in a way no broadcast ever has. A former assistant has come forward, claiming that behind the scenes, the environment inside Stern's household wasn't just demanding, it was hostile. And that's what makes this different. Because this isn't about something said on air. It's about what allegedly happened when the microphones were off. So the real question is this: what actually went on behind closed doors? And why is it only coming out now? At the center of this entire situation is a lawsuit filed by a former assistant who claims that working for Howard Stern and his wife, Beth Stern, involved more than just a heavy workload. According to the complaint, the conditions were intense, the expectations were high, and the environment itself became difficult to endure over time. The term being used here matters: hostile work environment. That's not a casual accusation. It suggests a pattern, something ongoing, not isolated. And it immediately raises the stakes. Because when that kind of claim is attached to someone like Howard Stern, a figure who has spent decades controlling conversations and shaping narratives, the story doesn't stay small for long. But here's where things become complicated. Howard Stern has responded, and he's not backing down. He has denied the allegations, pushing back against the version of events being presented. Which means now, there are two completely different narratives unfolding at the same time. On one side, an assistant claiming emotional strain, pressure, and an environment that crossed the line. On the other, Stern rejecting those claims entirely. And that's exactly why this situation is gaining attention. Because it's not just about what happened, it's about who people believe. And that's where the drama really starts to build. At first glance, the story seems straightforward. An employee files a lawsuit against a high-profile employer. But the deeper you look, the more layers start to appear. Howard Stern isn't just any employer. He's someone whose entire career has been built on pushing limits, breaking boundaries, and saying things others wouldn't. For years, that persona worked in his favor. It made him stand out. It made him famous. But now, that same image is starting to shape how people interpret these allegations. Because some are asking a simple question. If that's who he is in public, what is he like in private? But that assumption, whether fair or not, is exactly where things get messy. Because a public persona doesn't automatically translate into private behavior. And yet, in situations like this, people often connect the two. That's the first layer of this drama. What people think they know. But then comes the second layer. The details in the lawsuit itself. The assistant isn't just describing a busy job. She's describing an environment that, in her view, became emotionally overwhelming. Long hours, high expectations, pressure that didn't ease. And when those elements are framed as part of a hostile environment, it shifts the conversation from workplace stress to something more serious. Because now, it's not just about difficulty, it's about impact. But then, something else adds to the complexity. Beth Stern is also named in the lawsuit, and that detail changes everything. Because it suggests that, from the assistant's perspective, this wasn't about one person's behavior. It was about a dynamic, a system, an environment shaped by more than one individual. And that's where the third layer begins. Because once a situation feels systemic, it becomes harder to dismiss as a misunderstanding. It becomes something that demands closer attention. But even then, there's still a major gap. Because right now, everything we're seeing comes from two opposing positions: the claim and the denial. There's no final judgment, no confirmed outcome. And that uncertainty is what keeps the story alive. Because people don't just react to facts. They react to tension, to unanswered questions, to the feeling that there's more beneath the surface. And in this case, there clearly is. Howard Stern has spent decades in control of his narrative. But this time, the narrative isn't his to control. It's unfolding publicly, shaped by legal claims, media coverage, and audience reaction all at once. And that shift alone is enough to make this story stand out. Because it's not just about the allegations. It's about what happens when someone known for controlling the conversation suddenly becomes the subject of one. And that's where things take another turn. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. Workplace culture, especially in high-pressure environments, is already a sensitive topic. Expectations, boundaries, emotional strain. These are issues people are paying closer attention to than ever before. Which means this case doesn't just exist on its own. It connects to a much larger conversation. And that amplifies everything. The claims feel bigger. The reactions feel stronger. The scrutiny becomes more intense. But even with all of that, one thing remains unchanged. Nothing has been proven yet. And that matters. Because in stories like this, the line between perception and reality can blur quickly. What people assume isn't always what's true. But at the same time, what's claimed can't be ignored either. And that balance is exactly what makes this situation so difficult to navigate. So now the question isn't just what happened, it's what happens next. Because depending on how this unfolds, the impact could go far beyond this single case. Reputation, legacy, public trust. All of it is now part of the equation. But just when it seems like the situation is clear, there's one more detail that shifts the perspective again. This entire story, despite how much attention it's getting, is still in its early stages, which means everything, from the claims to the response, could evolve. New information could emerge, context could change, and the narrative we're seeing now might not be the one that lasts. So instead of a conclusion, what we're left with is something else entirely. A situation that's still developing, a conflict that hasn't been resolved, and a question that still doesn't have a clear answer. What really happened behind closed doors? Because until that's fully understood, this story isn't over. It's just getting started.